Hello, I'm Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast show, and today we have James Cadman, the CCO of Luware, in the studio in London in person. How are we doing, James?
Morning, Mark. Yeah, doing really well, thanks. Yeah, just back from a vacation, so in a really good mood.
Great. Anywhere nice?
Yeah, went to Cyprus for a week.
Lovely,
yeah.
Lovely. Everyone seems to be off in August at the moment,
It's
so
great.
it's hopefully we'll get back to business as usual in September. James, when I normally get a guest in the studio, I normally either do two things. I'll have a look through their LinkedIn profile, or I'll ask someone about their background. Now, I did ask about your background, and I heard on the grapevine that you started your career not in engineering but in double glazing, sales, doing telesales, cold calling. So tell me about that. How'd you get into that?
Do you know, I was 16 years old, right, effectively looking for a bit of beer money, so to speak, and I just started sort of looking around at what I could do at that point, and I got this role at Stay Bright Windows up in Solihull, all right? And I kind of pictured this call centre. You know, you got this image in your head. There's headsets. There's people at computers, like the stock images. And when I got there, it was a room, more like a cupboard, right, with a U-shaped kitchen work counter around the outer edge, with a chair, around at each. And you had an old plastic phone on the desk with a dial pad, and a sheet of paper. And you would have to call each number on the sheet of paper and go through your spiel to try and get them on the hook. You weren't actually making the sale, you're sort of opening the leads up, right? It was more like a lead gen situation. And for each one, you put a smiley face next to your name on the whiteboard at the front. It's kind of incredible if you imagine these sort of teenagers, first jobs, and this really horrible, hardcore, cold calling sales environment. And if you see everyone else getting the smiley faces up there, you start slipping behind. It's horrendous, really.
How did you decide who to call?
Well, we didn't. This was the funny part. We'd so often get people saying, "Hang on a minute, I'm ex-directory. You can't call me. How did you get this number?" Of course, what you can't say is that you've got a spreadsheet printed in front of you where the last digit is a 1 on line 1, the last digit is a 2 on line 2, and it literally just iterated up. And you were ringing the entire number range, so you could call a couple of hundred numbers in a shift. And it was just guesswork, pure guesswork.
Just random.
You could be
calling. Do you want your Windows change? That's it.
Business answers. You wasted your time. If someone answers at home, it's maybe you get something on the hook. You're just trying to get them to agree to the supervisor calling back. That's all you're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jesus.
It was awful. It was awful.
Yeah, so that obviously put you off that career, maybe your sales career. But talk me about how you got into BT, because your first job was a field engineer.
That's right, yeah. So sort of first real job, so to speak. So I was around 19. I was working a bar at the time, so nothing kind of long-term or career-wise. And I was really looking to get in something technical. I'd done some A-levels, but didn't feel like university was really for me. And I've always been interested in tech. It's always been a passion. So it kind of runs in the family. There's a lot of this that goes around when you talk to BT people. So my dad was at BT, my grandfather was at BT, and I ultimately met my wife there. She was an apprentice with me at the same time. So yeah, at 19, I got this apprenticeship as a field engineer. Not sort of outside climbing the poles or anything, so I was luckily in the buildings, but I was fixing this equipment that was designed in the 60s and 70s, fitted in the 80s. It was real sort of hands-on engineering. You'd have to draw things out to diagnose problems and troubleshoot. And look, it was an amazing opportunity, because I always like to tell people that when people moan about youngsters and work ethic, and where do you expect it to come from? All right, you get people from college or university. You're sort of disappointed when they don't have this mad work ethic, but someone needs to install that. And I was really lucky that I was in this environment where it's pretty hardcore, to be honest, right? You're working with people who fitted that equipment in the 60s, 70s and 80s. They've been life there. They really push you, and they by force install a work ethic. So I was really lucky to have the people around me there that really pushed me. And I managed to come out of that apprenticeship in about 50% of the time, so it should have been 3 years, did it in a year and a half, because I just really enjoyed it. And I was living the dream, right? I had Warwickshire as my patch, so I'm a man in a van on my own, all day in the countryside, going around fixing things. There was new kit as well, right? So there was some of the new technology, like the broadband stuff, which was great. So it was this really diverse mix. The problem is that in an environment like that, if you're really good at the role, right, they don't really know what to do with you, because there's not really a career path in the technical side within field engineering. And I didn't know it at the time, but there is in BT more broadly. but not really in that kind of area, in the operational side. And so at the time I felt a bit aggrieved, but the only thing they could do was send me on these leadership academies. So I was involved in something called the Leadership Fast Track, the Talent Pool, various bits like that, which was all leadership stuff. And it bugged me because I didn't want to be a manager, right? It's like, I'm a technical guy, I'm an engineer, I want to be more technical and I want to progress there. But they sort of did the best that they could with me. And sort of while I was there, I was doing some secondment work. So I was lucky enough to be working with a guy in the change deployment team. So I was getting involved in a lot of transformation activities in field engineering. And then eventually they sort of said, well, look, you've done this leadership academy, we need a manager in the region in this role. And they sort of just pushed me into it, and I felt a little bit aggrieved at the time. Yeah.
Why didn't you want to go into management?
I mean, firstly, you have to remember it's a very institutionalised environment, right? And so there is a little bit of them versus us when it comes to being on the tools and the management. But I just didn't see it as a path, right? I mean, I'm a techie, I'm an engineer, and my team now hate me saying this, by the way. I'm constantly, I'm an engineer, by the way, right? Like, yeah, James, you're not now, right? So, yeah, I wanted to stay technical, and I'll be honest, I had quite a difficult time when I was a first leader. I was 22, I think, at the time.
It's young, yeah.
Yeah, and I ended up running the field team in the work area that I was trained in. So but it got bigger. So I ended up with about 30 engineers. I was covering 200 buildings in terms of responsibility. So that was from Coventry to Skegness and Northampton to Nottingham. So it was the whole of the East Midlands patch. And I did 100,000 miles a year in the car, just trying to get one-to-ones done and all that sort of stuff. It was tough because in that role you have all of the accountability, but none of the ability or autonomy to change anything, right? So it's quite frustrating. But looking back now, you know, it made a big difference. It built so many skills. You know, it was sort of like a crash course in all of the things that hopefully most leaders don't need to deal with very often, right? In terms of performance management and all those sorts of things. And how to get people on side. You know, I had a guy all the way over in the Wash. You know, he's sort of on his own in a massive patch. He'd been there for 40 years, incredibly institutionalised, anti-management. First meeting I ever had with him, he just like, I don't care what rating you give me, I don't care, you bloody management, blah, blah, blah. Just do what you like, let me get on with the job. And in the end, it turns out he was frustrated because no one ever listened to him, right? He's saying, you know, he's in his sort of 70s by the time I managed him, and he'd been saying for the last 20 years, we need apprentices in this area because I'm not going to be around long, and someone needs to look after this kit. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say this stuff can be life or death because it's people's home landlines, right? If you can't call an ambulance when you need one, you're in trouble. Yeah. So they take it really seriously. And so, yeah, managed to turn that around by actually just the simplest of things, just listening to the guy and trying, or at least visibly trying, to make that case with the leadership team that we should have some youngsters coming up there. But to be honest, I spent a lot of the last year or so of that role fighting to find another technical one, but no one believed I was technical anymore.
Yeah, no one believed it.
Yeah.
Those skills must have helped you as you progressed through the business because you were there 11 years, you had more promotions. So talk me through quickly how you've actually risen through BT.
Yeah, so I managed to kind of escape the people leadership side whilst maintaining that kind of grading. So I found this whole world of professionals, they call it, in BT. So I was a service integration specialist for a subsidiary. That was really interesting. So we were setting up a new network management centre, integrating some people who've been tupied in from another business and trying to integrate the technical side of how they work day to day. So that was a really fascinating role. It was a bit lonely. It was just me and my boss sort of thing, doing the technical side. But there was a lot of impact. There was a huge scope that I had there, which was fantastic. So I got to learn about supplier management and a lot more technical stuff. And then I sort of never had an office job in my whole career. I was always a man in a van or a man in a car. Well, then I worked from home and sort of travelled a lot. And so I started looking around. I thought, well, I've moved to Essex now, so I'm close to London. What can I find in the area? And I managed to get this role as a compute designer in Blackfriars. So I was my first office job. The problem is doing compute stuff, and that's like AD design, you know, sort of update servers and things like that. It's a lot of government work. So typically you're being sent out to strange secret locations that are not particularly pleasant, doing the most boring things. And I managed to slide sort of sideways when a couple of guys left their roles doing the UC side. So it's got the same office, they were doing UC design, Skype for Business at the time, and they left to an internal move. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have a crack at this. Never touched Skype for Business before, apart from kind of deploying it internally for this NMC, but not the server side. And I went from zero to taking on all of the design work for ongoing customers in sort of 6 months and turned a few accounts around. And I was effectively the last man standing doing Skype design in the UK, and I was working with a couple of guys in India that were really fantastic people. And that's how I got to know Luware. So I was actually working with Luware at the time to figure out how BT could deploy Luware's on-prem software into their cloud platforms to offer out.
And tell me, that for the listeners out there that are thinking, who are Luware, Zurich-based business, give us a bit of an overview of what they actually do.
Yeah, so Luware, we're a software vendor. We're a SaaS provider these days, but we started as an on-prem kind of software solution provider. It was a university project of our co-founders back in 2010. Originally, it's a fun story actually. Originally, it was intending to click together Cisco Call Manager with Office Communication Services, as it was at the time, and Cisco didn't like that very much. So they decided, well, hey, let's build our own contact center routing engine that can click into OCS. And it kind of blossomed from there. There was a couple of Swiss customers that said, shut up and take my money, before it was even a company, so to speak. So that's kind of how it was founded, and then we grew into a pretty sizable small business at the time. So I'm going back to sort of 2017 when I joined, and we just established the company in the UK. So I was employee number 2 in this subsidiary anyway in the UK. We had about 50, maybe 30, 40 people globally, mostly in Zurich. And then fast forward to today, and we've switched now to over 5 years ago to a fully SaaS business with Nimbus and Recordings, our 2 flagship product lines. And we're now 150 people globally, with people, a really big team in London, and about 60 people in the UK, loads in Switzerland, and even some in Canada, Germany, Poland, etc. Yeah.
Now, don't take this the wrong way, James, but if I'd have gone back 5 years, no one would be talking about customer success, or that wouldn't even be a role that anyone would be interested, done, or even thought about as a career. Tell me now, when you started getting that role, how did you actually recruit people? Because there was no one in customer success. I was a recruiter. No one had a customer success background 6, 7, 8 years ago.
I mean, the interesting thing is, if you were in the US 5 years ago, it probably would have been a bit more prevalent, right? So the whole idea came from Salesforce originally. That's where it originates from. And I think a lot of people get kind of put off by the name. It's a little bit of like, that's a bit of a tacky sort of name. If we look back 5 years from our perspective, we had this really successful on-prem business where we were selling perpetual licenses. And the model's very different there. So I had a team of PS engineers, and basically we just went to people's place of work, installed the software, kind of installed it and ran away. Right, we did a pretty good job of the support. The only recurring revenue was really the support and maintenance. And so we were figuring out, how do we change the engines mid-flight, right? Because being a privately held business, you can't really afford that drop in revenue. So you can't just cut the old stuff and run to the new stuff. So you had to figure out, how do we transition? And our then CEO, one of the co-founders, he came to me and he said, look, I think it's right to globalize the delivery teams, right, between the UK and Switzerland underneath you. And the thing is, I don't know how to deliver service in SaaS, right? Go figure it out. And I had this incredible luxury of being able to go and figure out, well, what does service look like under a SaaS model with recurring revenue? How do we need to change what we're doing? And the big thing that I really landed on was, the people we had at the time were 90% technical, 10% soft skills, right? We was talking infrastructure, DNS, Active Directory all day, every day. We didn't need to do any of that in the cloud because the DevOps team figure all the infrastructure out. We just need to turn up and help the customer figure out how to install it and use it. So I started looking around and I realised that actually it's 90% soft skills. So I started to put job adverts out there, spoke to our existing recruiters. It was a little bit easier in the UK. I think the UK was a little bit ahead of the curve there. But in Switzerland, I had recruiters literally laugh at me.
This job doesn't even exist. What are you talking about?
Who are these random people that have never done tech and you want to hire them? They say to me, I've hired 10 engineers for you in the past couple of years. What is this role? And it really came from, I was finding people that had absolutely zero background in tech, right? And some of the best hires that I've made have been people coming from hospitality or retail backgrounds, even the arts for a number of people in the early days. Because it's all about relationships, right? You need people that really understand other people. And the role is really performing. You are a performer. You're sitting there all day, every day, on a meeting, on a video call, performing to your customers. And so we sort of started making that transition then 5 years ago. We kept the PS business going whilst we needed it, and slowly shuttered that and transitioned it all over to customer success. Yeah.
James, lots of channel firms talk about, we want to bring talent from outside, we want to bring talent from retail, we want to bring talent from whatever other industry. But when they look at the CV, they say they haven't got an experience of channel marks. There's no point seeing them. How do you think channel firms can get over that? And you're an advocate of it because you have employed people from different backgrounds. But how can people from different backgrounds come into the industry? And also, how can people from channel firms stop thinking that this talent can't learn tech?
It's interesting when you get into the psychology of it, because it really starts with your job advert, actually. So if we look at the profile of people in customer success, generally speaking, the trend is the opposite in terms of gender split to technical roles, right? So it's very heavily female oriented in terms of the roles that you tend to fill. And when you're coming at it from a technical background, you tend to do the typical trick of putting loads of requirements into your job ad, right? But if you look at the psychology of how to attract a more neutral or a more balanced set of applicants, men typically, this is very broad brush, right? But typically men can look at a job advert, tick off one or two of the requirements as must-haves and go, sod it, I'll have a go.
Yeah, they'll apply.
They'll have a go. Women, on the other hand, prefer to tick off the majority of the requirements before they'll say they'll have a go. So already you're at a disadvantage if you're looking for those roles that are typically female oriented and you then stack it with loads of must-haves. You're already excluding most of the customer success kind of market out there. So you need to really back off in terms of what you're asking for. Then it's a case of taking a leap of faith and saying, do you know what? I'm going to interview this person because they've got tons of experience in, customer facing roles. And I love it when it's a weird customer facing role. If you've worked a bar, if you've been in retail, if you've done something where you've had to deal with angry people face to face, glorious, right?
Yeah, difficult people.
It's so hard face because you can't back out of it.
Yeah.
So they really understand the psychology of how to deal with people, even if it's only subconscious. And then, I'm sort of famously evil when it comes to the interview process. Firstly, I like to be really welcoming and neutral on interviews. I like to create an environment, particularly in the early days, where people can be at their best. I'm not trying to catch anyone out, ever. If I ask a question and they can't answer it, I'll always tell them what I was looking for as an answer, because I hate the idea that they walk out of the room thinking, oh God, but what did he actually want to know? What was he looking for? It's just an awful experience, right? It's not a fun time. And even if they don't succeed with the role, I'd like them to come away with a good experience. But the famous one that we do is there's a little test to see if they're going to be able to pick up that technical stuff. So we do like an initial interview, which one of my team leads will do with one of their team members to check for cultural fit. And then the interview with me, we give them a week and we give them a technical challenge, and it's to write a PowerShell script. But it's a really, really simple script, right? And the worksheet they get in advance is, look, we just want you to read out the free space on your hard drive. That's all we want you to do. You can use any source on the internet. You can use ChatGPT. You can use anything to figure out how to do it. But here's the thing. What we're looking for is that when you come to the interview, it's not about how good the script is. It's about how well you can articulate what it's doing and how it does it. So it's really about, can you understand the fundamentals and then explain it in simple language? Because that's everything about the job, right? It's talking to the engineering and the product team about this new call routing or AI feature and being able to translate that into language the customer understands. So, yeah, and by the way, we've hired people that have failed on the technical side of it.
Let's move on to sort of 2025, because I want to sort of talk to you about what's going on in the market at the moment. We've seen lots of contact centres closing across the UK and abroad. What do you think's really driving that?
There's an interesting thing. If you look back a couple of years ago, we actually saw a stalled or failed attempt at the whole bots idea. I don't think we really called it AI at the time, but it was bots was the answer. And there was this kind of revolt in customers against these automated systems. People hated them. As much as at the time they hated offshoring, by the way, right? There was a big rebellion against that. And what you saw at the time then was people then saying, hey, our differentiator is onshoring, or our differentiator is you talk to a real person. And I think for me, the first spark of the shift was First Direct in the UK. So no IVR, straight through to a real person, and importantly, that real person can do anything. You never get passed around. And that started to set the tone for a shift in customer expectations, right? And so we started to see this kind of reduction in the vast, huge buildings full of people crammed into small desks, just answering 20-second long phone calls all day. And I think what was driving that was a number of factors. Firstly, it's shifting customer expectations, but fueling that is everybody got better at taking the information to where the customers are. Right. So if you think about when you have a problem, for example, with your phone contract, right? The last thing that you want to do these days is actually call them. You really don't want to do that. What companies have figured out is let's make a really good knowledge base. Let's build a really good FAQ. Let's build really good KCI. So AO is a really good example of this. I think they've nailed KCI. Right. Majority of the calls that they ever get is people saying, where's my washing machine, right? They know your phone number, you put that in the order form, so when you call, you don't get an IVR. The first thing it does is it looks up your phone number and says, I can see you've ordered a washing machine, the current status is it's in dispatch, it'll be with you this afternoon, right? And you cut most of the calls out. It's just this incredible kind of aha moment where you say, well, actually, let's take the information to the customer. So I think already there's a shift there, and that accelerated then the expectation changing in the customer base. But if we look at the high profile cases that have happened recently, you've got BT, Sky and a couple of others that have kind of openly said we're closing these big call center operations. They were kind of inefficient to begin with, right? They really narrowly chopped up the end-to-end customer journey. So you'd call in, you'd get transferred 3 or 4 times depending on what you wanted to do. You could never really complete the call in one go. And so I think people are acknowledging now that when you get to a real human, they want a real human experience, right? They've been through the self-help, they've been to the knowledge base, they've looked at the FAQ. By the time it reaches the point where they think, actually, I do need to flipping call these people, you better be able to answer that in one call, right? And you better really be able to help them. And so, it's far more efficient if you can have less people that are higher skilled, and more importantly, they've got greater empathy around them, and they can really help the customer in that context. And that goes really beautifully hand in hand with now the emergence of automation and AI use cases, because what's different this time around is it's gotten so good that the customer doesn't care. Right, so if you think about previously, there was memes about it. I'm talking to the partner and just say, no, put me through to a human, right? You don't really see that kind of emerging as a trend these days, because the AI solutions have got good enough that people don't care. What do you want when you call EE? You want your problem solved. Yeah. And if you don't care how that happens, you just care that the problem gets solved, right? So I think, the days of these vast environments, these barn-sized buildings full of people pecking away at computers is kind of behind us. And by the way, it's going to become more important, because if they have spoken to an AI first and they haven't got this sorted out, you need the empathy, you need the human touch, and you really need someone to care about getting a solution. Yeah,
because by the time you get through that automation and you haven't got your answer through the AI or whatever it is, you're sort of pissed off, aren't you? You're thinking you need this sorted out.
Absolutely.
So you have to have those emotional skills.
You must do,
that is going to actually help your problem. Do you think there's going to be a transfer of jobs and skills? Because when I speak to people about AI, they mention, it's going to cut loads of jobs and loads of call agents are going to be losing their jobs. I don't see where the job creation is going to be. So, where is the future for those sort of people that are losing their jobs?
I would hope and like to think that actually the call centre space is moving up market, right? So previously it's kind of seen as an entry-level role. It's actually... side anecdote, right? But I had a realization, like an epiphany, just in the last sort of year or so, because I started to get frustrated that I was losing people from my department to other departments at Luware. I had just had this light bulb moment of realizing that actually we are the customer services, we're the customer contact center in effect, and we're the entry point. And so people don't typically go to customer services from other departments in a company. They come from there. So it's a bit like a talent engine, if you like. And so, that's a great opportunity. And I think what we see there is, well, at least what I'd like to see, is we view contact center agents not as kind of these high volume, mid to low skill roles, but actually it's a really, it's a more high end profession, right? Because you need the skills, you need the empathy, you need that breadth of scope to be able to really help in those cases. In terms of where's the job creation come in, to be honest, we're not really seeing in our customer base that they're reducing volumes, right? What we're seeing is if they planned or their sort of growth trajectory was to double over the next few years, we're seeing that kind of level off, and we're seeing more of efficiency gains with the existing people rather than big cuts. But then again, we typically work more with those kind of high-end, high-touch call centers generally anyway. So it's a bit of a shift. And I think what you're seeing there is those high-volume call centers shifting to that model.
Everyone's saying AI is the future. Everyone's talking about it. Every episode that we've had this year, James, we're bringing up this subject. So AI is the future. Where do you see it for call centres? Where's the opportunity for them? Because I'm still seeing that call centres are behind the curve with it. Yeah. You're still having problems. You're still not getting through to people. I'm still calling up and having people give me to 3 or 4 departments. So where are they going to be able to take advantage? Where's the opportunity for them?
I think firstly, the introduction to it was a bad first impression for a customer service leader, right? The first iteration that we all saw was a white chat box, right? How do you look at that and think to yourself, I can use that in a call centre scenario, right? Okay, maybe you think my agents could type a question and get an answer. That's not really something that's tangible and repeatable, right? So I think the big shift then comes with the buzzword of agentic, right? So it's this idea of the thing you put into that box can be automated, right? So some system can automatically fill that box and then give the output to the agent without them having to ask for it, right? So that's kind of a bit of an epiphany moment. But if we take that logic and transpose that to before the agent's connected, what if the system is able to take the end caller's input, use that in the chat box and give the output as a spoken announcement, right? That's where you then get to those interactive scenarios. And we can range from really simple, easy going, low risk use cases all the way through then to the things that I think people shy away from. So if we think about those easy use cases, IVRs, right? They range from dead simple, 1, 2 or 3, password reset, replacement laptop, other options, all the way through to multi-level, really complex, large spans of different numbers you need to press, right? And what you see, particularly in those environments, is you see a high volume of calls transferred in the first 30 to 60 seconds. And the reason that's happening is because the caller got confused, landed in the wrong place, and the first agent to speak to them figures out, you're in the wrong place, I can't help you, you need to go over there. So we've got a customer that we're working with at the moment, it's an insurer in Europe. They have one of these quite complicated IVR setups. They've been working to implement what we call, the technical term is an intent-based IVR, but it's effectively a fully automated bot. So you speak to this bot before you speak to a person, there's no IVR. Say, hey, what are you calling about? Well, I've crashed my car. Okay. Well, from that, we can skip 4 levels of the IVR and put you straight through to the automotive claims team. Now, what they've seen is a 20% reduction in those calls at the beginning where they had to transfer them. If you think about the volumes that they're driving, 30 to 60 seconds to introduce yourself to the customer, find out what they're talking about, figure out they're in the wrong place, make a warm transfer and get rid of the call before you can take your next one. So that's a long time. You can do a lot in 60 seconds, especially when you take that to a call center with potentially thousands of calls a day. 20% is huge. And this is the least risky from a customer experience perspective use case. And so what we're talking about here is not these ephemeral ideas of it's going to change the world. No. This is a real customer that's really implemented it and really seen 20% improvement there. And so that's 20% less people that they need to recruit in the future. That's huge.
Absolutely. The tech is moving so fast. Are the people using it moving fast enough? How can we keep up with this?
It's an interesting question. I think if you do it well, why do you need them to? And what I mean by that is, we talk about adoption of new technology. When that impacts the way that an agent works day to day, it's really important, right? But if you're sort of taking that change to them in a way that just makes their day better, then actually the adoption curve kind of collapses into almost nothing. I'll give you a good example. If you've got agent augmentation tools, so for example, let's take the First Direct example. You know, they can be calling about anything. It can be very complicated. There's probably lots of processes that the agent needs to know about. What if they have a real-time feed of an AI that's listening to the conversation and inserts knowledge in the view of the agent during the middle of the call, right? So I'll save you searching. Here's the document you need, or here's the form you need to fill in, or here's how to treat that with the customer. You know, the adoption curve goes to zero because actually you're just saving them time, right? In terms of how do you keep up, I think that's where it comes down to the business leaders and the IT organisations to make a wise investment, right? We already see that in you can start a deployment cycle. You know, you can start building your agentic use case, and before you even deploy it, there's 4 new models out, and you're out of date, right? So it's figuring out how do we go with the right vendors, how do we stay up to date, and a good example of that I think is Microsoft are doing a really good job with things like Azure AI Foundry, where you can then easily switch the model for the latest one, and they make those available really rapidly. So you can really keep up, and you can switch the model out if a new one becomes available and it proves to be more useful to you. You know, there's a lot of smaller niche players out there, but then it can be a little bit more difficult to be able to keep up in a sense, yeah.
James, no one really wants to speak to an AI, I don't think, but we also don't want to speak to a human that can't answer our questions.
Yeah.
How do we balance that and you touched on it about having empathy, how do we balance that we're using AI, but we're getting that human touch, but they're answering our questions, that mix of the two? How's that balance going to happen? You
need to look at the overall customer journey, right? And any kind of CX leader should be already journey mapping what it's like for their customers. You know, how do they arrive with you? What's the journey to get there? And I think that for me, it really comes down to that shift, and it's more generational than you think. There's a long time passed since the last time everyone was annoyed at bots, right? You know, there's a new generation and a half now are becoming consumers. So you've got Gen Z and the ones after them are now, you know, a big part of the consumer landscape. It was us as millennials really that were annoyed at bots last time. Gen Z, they just want the question answered. I think, you know, they don't really care if it's an AI or if it's a real person. But I think if you didn't get the question answered, then you're frustrated, right? And so then getting that call into a real human being is vital. The way that you get there and give the agent the best chance is to show them the conversation that they had with the bot, right? So, yeah, I think it's a famous thing historically before all this technological shift happened. I told your colleague before the transfer what I wanted. Why are you asking me again? This isn't a new problem, right? So, having a really good end-to-end journey where you have the information following the callers, I think it's an age-old solution to an age-old problem. The AI is not really affecting that much. You know, you just need to pass all the information along with the call.
That is so frustrating, isn't it? You call up, you've gone through it. Yeah, I'll pass you through. Can we go through it again? It's like, no,
of course, they're using a different line of business tool, different set of apps. It's a nightmare, Fix that first.
It's an absolute nightmare. What advice would you give to firms that are trying to make this transition? They're thinking about, they've got the customer journey, they've seen where the problem is, but they haven't really thought it through. What's your advice when they want to start off?
The first thing is to find a really good partner to go with, right? Somebody who's got experience in that sector and can prove value return. So they've done some of these AI integrations, and they can demonstrate how they've actually delivered benefit for their customers in a meaningful way. That's point number one. And I think point number two is the majority of the investment you're likely to make isn't actually anything to do with the AI itself. You will find that all the data you need is split across different tools, different databases, different platforms. The processes that your people are following are split between 4 or 5 different tools, right? And if you really want to be able to automate as much as possible, you need to bring that together. And that's really where the majority of the investment is. And once you do that, then you can be like riding that wave of the advancements, because the AI part is surprisingly one of the easier bits to kind of keep up to date compared to what do we do with this massive amount of data spread across all these different places.
Let's talk about the future, James.
Let's do it. Where's
the big bet for Luware? Where do you see actually winning in 2025 and beyond?
We're really betting big on the AI story. We've just announced the virtual user, which is where you can bring those automation cases in front of the external caller. And that's allowing intent IVRs, but also all the way up to these really complex automation cases that you can fully do without agents involved. So for us, that's a really big deal. And what you'll see is that as the year progresses is more use cases around AI. So we kind of split that into two sides. We've got the virtual user stuff, which is customer facing, but then we've got what we call the virtual assistant side, which is all about enabling the agent and empowering the agent. So that's your real-time transcription, your prompting, your real-time assistance, sentiment analysis, but also let's not forget about the supervisors, right? If I'm running a call center operation, at the moment I'm probably doing quality analysis post-call, right? And it's probably only samples. What if the AI is listening into every concurrent call and flags to me instantly if the sentiment's going sideways with a newbie, right? Then I can use the existing features to click one button and be in the call. And I can whisper to the agent, or I can barge in, right, and get involved. So actually we can avoid that problem before it becomes a problem, because the AI's told us, hey, you might want to step in here. The sentiment's going a little bit sideways, go and get involved. So there's a whole raft of things you can do, but I think what I'd like to do is really focus less on directly selling AI features, right? Because it's really quite difficult. It's more about how can we work with a customer to build an end-to-end solution, right? Is AI involved in that chain? For most of them, probably at some point, right? But what that really looks like is going to be very unique. It's all very custom to each individual use case. And so, specifically selling AI features, you'll see it on the website. There's a lot of it, right? It's all good stuff, and they're incredible features. We've got some of the most incredible people working on it, right? They always throw these terms around. It's like, okay, these are new words. But really and truly, what it comes down to at the end of the day is how can we enable you to deliver better service? Because ultimately, that's the differentiator for you in your market, right? Is AI part of that picture? Probably.
Yeah. Does
it matter? Ultimately, we're trying to get to the goal, deliver value.
Let's talk about your job, James.
Yep.
Chief Customer Officer. What does success look like in that role? Is it just everyone's happy that you've got great customers? Is that it? Happy customers, James still got a job.
There's a few industry metrics, shall we say, that are a little bit more revenue focused than that, right? So the role is really most easily wrapped up by saying it's post-sales activities. So right. I look after our post-sales motions. That starts with onboarding, right? So when the customer lands with us as a new one, but really it's owning the whole relationship and the life cycle. And the intention is to keep the customer with us. So in customer success, there's this concept of nurturing your segments, nurturing your customers, and you want to keep them customers for as long as possible. You want to keep them renewing, right? So for us, what that looks like is that the customers are having a really good time. They enjoy not only the product, but the service that we deliver, right? And that comes again into living these things that we're talking about, right? So we're not just waffling on about what you should do, but we do the same thing you do. We're customer services, right? So we need to walk that walk as much as we can. And so what success looks like for us is that we ourselves become customer zero, right? So we're using all these AI tools. We're a center of excellence for the deployment and use of them. And then we're not just deploying it somewhere for a customer, but we're relating it to our own experiences. We can understand how they feel if it's going well, if it's not going well, how to resolve that, how to bring them through that journey, how to help with adoption. That's really what success looks like for us. And thankfully, there's no big organizational transformation we need to do that. I think we'd really got set on that stuff. But now it's about really staying up to date with the technology in a bigger way than we did before.
James, are you the most hated person for salespeople? I.e., I'm a salesperson, they're going to renew, that's going to customer success. I'm a salesperson, they want an upgrade, that's going to customer success. Do salespeople actually start fighting internally thinking, why are customer success taking the credit for this? Because actually I do have it in other firms where they say, oh yeah, we don't get paid on renewals now, customer success do it. I don't get paid on upgrades, customer success do it. I don't get paid on professional services, customer success do it. Is there internal conflict?
Well, look, I think regardless of whether it's customer success or professional services or anything else, right? Sales and delivery, not being the most harmonious relationship is like cats and dogs not getting along, right? I'm really lucky in the culture of the company at Luware really sets us up to have a great working relationship between the two departments. And, our Chief Sales Officer, David, and I are very closely aligned. There was some friction in the early days when we were trying to work out what does this new world mean for both of us, right? How do we slot into that? But the beauty of it is where before we had conflicting priorities actually now our priorities are more aligned than they used to be, because what's driving the sales team at the end of the day is the thing that's going to drive revenue, right, for them. And believe it or not, I want the same things. Where before I wanted things that were like, I want things that will give me less support tickets, or customers talking to me less. Now I want things that are going to give me upsell opportunities and expansion. And they're exactly the same features he needs, right? So actually, I think we're more hated by our CTO.
Brilliant.
Because now we're like double trouble. We're both pushing on the same thing constantly on the product team. The way we deal with it in reality is it's not them or us, right? Yeah. So we share the outcome on those successes, and the real power of that is we have a very different relationship with the clients than the sales team ever will, right? And that's both in a positive and a negative sense, depending on the scenario. So if we're talking about opening the door to an upsell, right, they, in a sense, have more trust in what we're saying because we're not there to sell to them, right? But then when it gets to a negotiation, we're really not well equipped to be able to handle that in the best way. We're not so experienced at it. And that's where we really have this kind of double team environment going on. So, we'll try and create opportunities. We'll try and find those expansions, find the use cases in that customer. But then we go together with the account exec and, play good cop, bad cop. So
you're getting on for now.
You're getting
on for now.
It's fantastic. I wouldn't change it.
Luware's known for Teams integration. That's what they're known for. Is that enough of a differentiator in today's market in 2025?
It's one differentiator. It's kind of the ticket into the show, right? We're not the only one. We're not the only vendor in the space doing a Teams contact center. But what we do with that is then expand out to say we can leverage then pretty much the whole Microsoft stack that you're already invested in. And so we approach things with a little bit of a different perspective. So one example would be integrations with CRMs. You see other competitors of ours where they say, hey, we've got it connected to Salesforce. You're like, great, but does that connect to do what I want it to do? Because there's 10 different ways you can integrate with Salesforce, right? What we do is we come along and say, we just integrate with Power Automate, right? What you do with that is up to you and your partner, your integration partner and or us to work with you to figure out, well, okay, maybe we have Salesforce in the loop there, but what if you want to mash Salesforce with ServiceNow because your support team are on that? Well, we can bring those two things together and build those solutions dynamically. So that's been a really good differentiator for us. And it also means that we integrate with anything Microsoft does, right? So it's constantly evolving on that front. But then when we talk about the AI piece, we're following very much the same approach. So particularly in Europe, data governance is really important. If you talk about the financial services industry, for example, insurers, banks, they are really uneasy about where the data's going with these LLMs, right? And one of the very few players in the space that is giving them any confidence about that is Microsoft. So a lot of them are choosing to put that investment into Copilot Studio, Azure AI Foundry. And so our first integrations with AI is not going to be Luware built AI features. It's going to be a way to bring agents from Copilot Studio or Azure AI Foundry and connect those into Nimbus. So what you can then do is you can keep the data sovereignty. You can be sure that your enterprise data controls are all in place. Everything's safe. You know what's going on with it. But actually, you can then use it in the call center as well, right? So you can leverage that functionality. So that's kind of a big thing. I think the last point is, and this has been a surprise one that kind of emerged over the years, but we really focus hard on being a one platform for all the use cases. So I've got some customers that have got one or two of the simplest licenses for the receptionist on the front desk, right? And then later on, they come to us with the 300-seat call center. And when they're managing that deployment, both those use cases are managed in the same place, same UI, same skills, all together in one pane of glass, right? So that's a huge differentiator that most players can't really do. You look at the likes of Genesis, for example, fantastic for that big call center, right? Complete and utter overkill for the receptionist on the front desk, right? We suit both of those niches, but then also bring that in a way that you don't have to go somewhere, learn new skills, you can manage it in one place.
My last couple of questions, and this one is quite prevalent in the market because most channel firms, VARs, MSP, always worry when they're dealing with a software vendor, if they're dealing direct, they're going to take the customer off me. They're going to start going direct. They're going to start selling professional services. They're going to get that annuity-based direct, and then they're going to cut me out. How do you ensure that when you work with a channel partner, that the relationship's cohesive, and you're not going to upset them?
Upset them, yeah. I mean, look,
is it difficult?
The thing for me is that we don't want to be a professional services team, right? As a SaaS vendor, that's the least scalable kind of business in the world, right? What we want to do is turn up, deliver some licenses, and cash the checks, right? To put it in really simple terms. And we want to be there if the partner can't support it, right? In terms of the delivery work and the professional services wrap around it, there's a massive value add for the channel in that stuff. It's big margin, it's ongoing relationship stuff. We would rather have a relationship ultimately with the partner, enabling them to deliver those services. We've just, at the beginning of this year, launched a completely new partner program. We've got certification paths, we've got new incentives, all of that good stuff going on. And at the same time, we introduced a new role within customer success called partner success management. So we even have people that are there solely to work with these partners and enable them to do those things. So I think for me, just look at how we've deployed our service delivery model. It's focused on customer success, not PS. We have a capability if we need to. Honestly, I don't like delivering it because it's not scalable, and I'd rather they focus on renewals and upsells and all those good things.
You heard it here first, channel. They're not going to upset you, and they're not going to take your margin. That's what they're obviously helping you make more margin in this market.
Absolutely.
My last question, I don't want you to sit on the fence. I don't want you to say Luware. I want you to say a company that you think in 2025, as we move into Q4, who is the one company to watch that you think is either doing really well, or as we go into 2026, is going to do well?
It's a really difficult question to answer, if I'm honest. The problem is that the space is moving so rapidly. The big one that I think, for us at least, kind of came out of nowhere is Sprinkler.
Okay.
Right, so we never saw them in the market. They suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and they're really AI focused in what they're doing around call center stuff. So I think that's one that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. And then of course you've got the big industry players, your Genesys, your TalkDesks, your 8x8, serving those niches. But the problem is this technological shift with AI. It's bigger than anything we've really seen since kind of the dot-com boom, right? And so what does that really mean? I don't think you could deliver something brand new today as AI and you're still not late to the game, if you know what I mean, right? But there's a big conversation around Apple's late to the game with the AI. There's no way they're late to the game. We're 2 years into it, right? And everything is moving so rapidly. I wouldn't be surprised if next year you see 10 new things coming out, 10 new competitors that pop up out of nowhere and suddenly make a splash. It's very difficult to predict, right? There's a lot of moving parts to it, but yeah, Sprinkler seem to come up out of nowhere. Yeah.
James, you've been a great guest. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.